On March 1st, 2024, legendary author and illustrator Akira Toriyama was announced to have passed away. Akira Toriyama's loss was unexpected and sent waves throughout the world. People everywhere had their hearts pour out over the impact that this man's creations have had on multiple generations, transcending cultural barriers in the process. From Dr. Slump to the Dragon Ball series to Sandland and his work on Dragon Quest and Chrono Trigger, everyone has been affected by Akira Toriyama's work at some point in their lives. Being born in 1998, I was around for the initial explosion of Dragon Ball Z in America, though I may have been too young to let it have a huge impact on me personally. I've watched Toonami for most of my life, and by proxy, I've watched Dragon Ball for most of my life. Sure, I have nostalgia for the blood-pumping guitars of the American opening of the dub, scored by Bruce Falconer and his peers. Wait, I should name them. Scott Morgan, Mike Smith, and Julius Dobos. They should be mentioned and properly attributed. Sorry for overlooking this. Let's continue. The next time on Dragon Ball Z. And Linda Young's Frieza, who definitely made me think that Frieza was a girl, as any 5-year-old probably would. None of these experiences are original, but they are shared amongst a huge amount of people, and that is what brings us together. According to my research, the Frieza saga was in reruns around 2003, and I was definitely old enough to remember those at least. I actually remember getting nightmares from Dragon Ball because Toonami was also showing uncut reruns of the Saiyan saga around 2005. And looking at the intro now, I think that it was entirely justified. But I'm getting off track. The main point is that due to never getting any home media releases of Dragon Ball, if it left the airwaves, it left my mind for the most part. I never forgot Dragon Ball entirely, but it really wasn't easy for me to find DVDs. I do remember begging my mom for the Dragon Box in 2010, which went as well as you can assume, considering the price. But forgetting about Dragon Ball is something that I personally think was an actual risk in the late 2000s. Not on an individual level, but a cultural level. The hardcore fans and blossoming weebs growing up on YouTube were probably always going to know about Dragon Ball, but for average Joes, it didn't seem super relevant. Dragon Ball Evolution obviously did not help matters, but what I'm talking about today served as a foundational pillar into Dragon Ball's reintroduction as a juggernaut. And it was pre-Super. Many people have talked about it over the years, but I like to give my perspective as someone who was around for it, and someone who's glad that it's still around for another generation to experience all over again. This isn't just the story of how Dragon Ball Z Kai landed over here in the States. It's also my story. Flash forward to March 2010. 14 years ago as I write this, Nicktoons announced that they were airing DBZ Kai, and we officially begin a brand new generation of kids knowing about DBZ. We're 2 years into a world without Toonami, and I had started junior high school at this point. Naruto Shippuden had been announced to be airing on Disney XD before this around October 2009, and people my age who weren't tech savvy or liked reading subtitles were excited. Even still, Dragon Ball Z Kai still kept my attention going forward. I still miss Toonami, of course. There still isn't anything that can match the ambiance, the aesthetic, or the dulcet tones of Steve Bloom's voice as Tom. Other networks simply aired anime, but Toonami made that an experience you couldn't get anywhere else. While Nicktoons' airings of DBZ Kai couldn't fill that space in my heart, it made a new one all the same. I have a lot of nostalgia being able to catch reruns before I went to school, or coming home after school for an episode before dinner. This was the first time I was able to watch the story of DBZ from the beginning, and I was really engaged with it, which was the plan for the network executives at Viacom at the time. Cartoon Network had already demonstrated that DBZ was a cultural juggernaut that transcended beyond the typical anime fan base. Media coverage at the time was already evidence of this. Not only that, anyone that could get a piece of that pie would make a return on investment almost immediately, and then some. So of course, when Nicktoons got a hold of Kai, they treated it very well, beginning with giving the show double premieres during prime time of its debut week of May 24th, 2010. According to Nielsen data from March 2009 to March 2010, Nicktoons is the #1 fastest growing kids network with kids 6 to 11, boys 6 to 11, tweens 9 to 14, and boys 9 to 14 in 2010. This bit does confuse me though, because as someone familiar with how animation had been treated by the same channel, underperforming Nickelodeon originals were cast off to this channel to have remaining episodes aired perhaps years later in inopportune time slots. I'm not surprised with this though, as networks have always had a history of picking up anime licenses on the cheap, instead of putting money into original programming. In the midst of the early 2000s anime boom, a lot of Saturday morning blocks that were still around employed the exact same practice, and included Kids WB borrowing the Toonami branding for a brief period of time. They never let Dragon Ball Z become a permanent fixture on this block, but the allure itself attracted a bunch of eyes, both new and old, to that block, especially those who might not have had cable. It's important to note that when Dragon Ball Z was originally in syndication, many of these networks, like the WB or other local channels, were airing the initial dub with the Ocean cast before Toonami picked it up and gave it a wider audience. But in a decade or so, Kai would help DBZ resurface on Saturday mornings. However, there would be a bit of a twist.
This is the CW4 Kids Friday Fall Preview. Now here's your host, Sonic the Hedgehog.
Thanks, Diane.
In April 2010, 4Kids had licensed Dragon Ball Z Kai to show on Saturday mornings, which was a huge curveball to say the least. While they were still around as an entity, 4Kids' hold on Saturday mornings and the anime industry as a whole were loosening. After all, it was seen that for a lot of more well-known anime, scrubbing it to be more appropriate for, well, kids wasn't necessary anymore. More titles are being marketed directly to anime fans who would be watching it uncut, dubbed on DVD, or subbed online.
Featuring an all-new Funimation voice cast. Witness the majesty of all that is One Piece from the very beginning, as it was always intended. Brought to you uncut and unedited.
Not to mention how Toonami and Funimation treated Dragon Ball Z back in the day was fundamentally opposed to the typical 4Kids treatment, getting away with more violence and blood. Localization in that era was still imperfect, and the funny DBZ dub wasn't accurate and had its own blemishes, but it was respected far more. I was around to watch both the Nicktoons and 4Kids versions of Kai, and honestly they were both godsends. Over the summer, I ended up having to stay at a relative's house, and they didn't have cable. So I was still willing to wake up early enough to watch reruns of DBZ Kai on Saturday mornings, which in of itself felt nostalgic in the same way that rushing home from school to see Goku turn Super Saiyan for the first time evokes memories from many others, regardless of the channel they were watching. This is speculative on my part, but something that always struck me as odd was the fact that the broadcast dub that aired on Nicktoons had more lenient censorship compared to when the show was airing on both 4Kids and Nicktoons. I'm fully aware that this may just be my memory, but there's a difference between cleaning up some bruises and making blood into sweat versus altering Gohan's injured eye or making Mr. Popo blue. Over the years, I've understood that talking about censorship in Kai is a bit of a minefield, because people get confused really quickly. It's definitely true that Kai is a bit more censored than Z due to Japanese broadcast standards changing over the years, and Nicktoons' dub was censored for an American audience on top of that, and that's the same as 4Kids treatment. However, the Nicktoons and 4Kids censorship doesn't exist anymore on official releases. You won't get Blue Mr. Popo on any Blu-ray you pick up of the show now. Not to say that networks are immune from criticism, but as I've done research for this project and can confirm, SMP practices are vastly different in what they allow on a cable channel compared to a publicly available channel. I've definitely lightened up my opinions on 4Kids over the years because of this. And just in case you want some more info straight from the source, feel free to listen to my friend Jace narrate the account of a former 4Kids employee that ended up doing AMA on Reddit many years ago about Dragon Ball Z Kai and many other shows that they worked on. Take it away.
I would first like to address the Blue Mr. Popo in Dragon Ball Z Kai first. Yes, we changed in blue. We didn't want to, and our graphics department has enough work to do, but we did it. We did so because CW's BS&P department forced us to do so. They're the ones who claimed that it was racist, and they were unwilling to air it unedited, despite the fact that Nicktoons has no issue with him, on top of the fact that he was also showing all his black glory on the WB back in the 90s. Many of the answers I'm going to give you are going to relate to BS&P, which is network control, i.e. CW, Cartoon Network, etc., not 4Kids, and it has no set of rules or standards. It all depends on the opinion of the person who happens to be at that role at the network at that time. You can read up on the standards and practices here. We fought with BS&P, but ultimately we lost. Some edits we win, some we lose, many we lose. When we switched from Fox to CW, CW had a huge problem with the saying, "What the shell?" on TMNT. 4 or 5 seasons in and now was a problem? That was one of the battles we won, an example of how things can change depending on the network and person you are working with. We've had issues pop up after a new person takes on the BS&P role at the same network. It's always a new set of rules. Very frustrating.
For this to happen to such a degree definitely made it an unpopular move for hardcore fans though. When it comes to music, a fun quirk of the English dub is that every couple of episodes, they have a different voice cast member sing an English version of the new opening theme, Dragon Soul. The Nicktoons and 4Kids airings stuck with a shortened version sung by another actor, but other cast members, including Sean Schimmel, Sunny Strait, and Brina Palencia also did versions. To my knowledge, the Blu-rays are the only way to listen to those other versions though. Nicktoons also occasionally air Jerry Jules' English version of Yeah Break Care Break, the ending song, and this was cut off when it was airing on 4Kids. Another unique trait that's not as fun is the fact that the soundtrack they used is from Kenji Yamamoto. To anyone not in the know, Kenji was a very popular composer back in the day, and primarily due to his work on the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games being received well, he was made a composer for DBZ Kai. I don't have any nostalgia for the DBZ Budokai games because I never had a PlayStation 2, but I do very much love his soundtrack. There's a bunch of music cues I still have memorized, and I love hearing them whenever I look up the soundtrack on YouTube.
I'm not letting you get away that easily. What fools.
You're the scum of the universe, and I'm getting sick of it!
The issue, however, is that Kenji Yamamoto is allegedly a plagiarist, as many of the songs take very liberal usage from pre-existing songs across pop culture. And once Toei noticed this, he was promptly fired. Now, wouldn't it be funny if I was actually able to talk with Brina Palencia about some of this stuff? Yeah, it would, because that's exactly what I did.
Thing that people know about Dragon Ball Kai, I should say,
is the soundtrack controversy.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I
So, oh, do you want me to explain, or do you want
No.
to
I know about it, but I have no idea. I heard what happened, but I have no idea how it happened or why it happened, or I have no explanation whatsoever. It had nothing to do with us on our end. Like I have no clue how that.
So,
How or
as
why that
someone,
went down.
yeah, oh, no problem. So, as someone who was in that demographic just watching, it was the Nicktoons and later, 4Kids versions of the show. When they were airing, they had, I want to say up to a point, they had the original Kenji Yamamoto soundtrack. However, I want to say, like, the news had dropped, like, in the middle of broadcasting that. So, of course, like, the Kenji Yamamoto stuff, like, end up in home media. And the reason why people my age have an affinity for the Nicktoons broadcast is because it has that soundtrack. But, of course, now current Blu-rays, home media, and the version that showed on Adult Swim's Toonami, it had the original Japanese soundtrack from Z. Except for the premiere. I guess someone got the wrong masters. And I saw, like, a couple minutes later, Jason DeMarco tweeted, like, yeah, that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah, that's another thing that's above my pay grade. I have no clue how something like that happens. I don't know.
Yeah. It was funny, like, I wouldn't have complained, like, personally.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, same. I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on.
But yeah, I assume, like, that happened, like, once you guys had already, like, been done recording, so it just mattered, like, making new Blu-rays, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The final 2 episodes in DBZ Kai's original Japanese run had Kenji's soundtrack replaced with the original Kikuchi score from Dragon Ball Z, and Toei later rescored DBZ Kai to use this score on all future re-releases. Around episode 63, the Kikuchi soundtrack was used on Nicktoons' broadcast. I haven't watched the original version of Z in many years, but experts of the original Japanese version claimed that the music tracks used for Kai were very slapdash, they only used a portion of all that was available, and they didn't fit the scene compared to the original version. Again though, as someone who was 12, 13, and hadn't seen DBZ subbed ever, the transition was handled well enough for young me to not notice, but if I'm watching Kai, I'm always going to prefer Yamamoto's soundtrack. And hey there! So this is a little bit of new info that I only became aware of after I started editing this new version of the video. Friend and mutual on Blue Sky, Hopkins Hat, ended up going through Dragon Ball Z Kai on Hulu, and it seems that for whatever reason there's a decent chunk of episodes that actually use the masters from Nicktoons, which obviously were censored. Episodes like 2, 3, 5, 6, 9, etc. are all censored, and it's weird because on any other digital distribution service, as well as home media, it's just uncut, as you would expect. It's weird, I have no real idea why this is happening. I will link Hopkins' original Blue Sky post in the description. This video was delayed for a lot of reasons, but hey, new information is one of them. Back to the show. Additionally, episode 98 was initially not aired on Nicktoons, but was saved for later to air with Dragon Ball Z: The History of Trunks. The impact of the 2011 Japanese earthquake was another event that affected the Japanese airing, and Toei ended Kai's Japanese run with episode 97 as a result. Episode 98 ended up being a DVD/Blu-ray exclusive. Episode 98 did actually air on 4Kids' block, now known as Vortex on CW. However, by April 13th, 2013, Dragon Ball Z Kai would cease airing on Nicktoons altogether, and on September 27th, 2014, DBZ Kai would finish airing on Vortex as the entire block was shut down. However, this doesn't mean Kai was done airing on TV as a whole. The year 2012 is a lot to think about for me. At the time, I was in 8th grade. TV was changing and the world around me was as well. The initial buzz Naruto Shippuden got when it was announced had waned at this point. Instead, I'd actually started catching some anime on Adult Swim action since I was now mature and could watch stuff I initially missed. For a good while, I had caught up on early Bleach thanks to Adult Swim having anime on demand. It's why those first couple of arcs of Bleach are so special to me. I was watching them as often as I could. Then, April 1st happened. I wasn't on Twitter at the time, thank God, but Adult Swim had always done April Fool's prank. For years, it was broadcasting Tommy Wiseau's seminal classic, The Room, but out of nowhere, this year's prank was a revival of Toonami. For one night, it was a bunch of all-star shows showing select episodes, including that week's Bleach, promos from back in the day, and a Mass Effect 3 review. Past Adult Swim action shows like Bleach, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and Eureka 7 were back, and I saw those shows for the first time. And this was the first real time I was able to watch Cowboy Bebop. Symbionic Titan and Thundercats 2011 originally flew right past me, and watching them on Toonami just felt right instead of watching them on Cartoon Network. However, for a lot of people, Toonami wasn't truly back unless Dragon Ball Z was back, and that wasn't going to happen anytime soon with other channels showing Kai. Not only that, but Jason DeMarco had asserted that the block's identity didn't need Dragon Ball, which I had interpreted not to say as Toonami was too good for Dragon Ball, but that they were around without it before and they'll continue to be without it for however long as they need to. I was fine with how the rest of the block was. The first hint that something was coming happened on May 18th, 2014. A new promo dropped, and in a week's time, Toonami was showing Cooler's Revenge for the first time on Adult Swim. The last time this aired was January 30th, 2004. However, it wasn't a confirmation that we'd be getting anything else, and I imagine movies showing for one night would be easier to license than an ongoing television show for 98 weeks. On October 18th, 2014, Toonami aired a teaser promo showing that Dragon Ball Z Kai would be coming soon. Come November 8th, it would be broadcasting, but not without one minor issue. The first Blu-ray printing, and from what I assume is how Toonami had their broadcast masters, had the Kenji Yamamoto soundtrack, which legally shouldn't be broadcast anywhere anymore. From there, not much went wrong with Kai being broadcast on Toonami. Broly, the legendary Super Saiyan, was also aired during this time, and Kai's continued popularity resulted in frequent marathons and reruns aplenty. For a while, Toonami was experimenting to see if people wanted to watch anime in primetime, so they had 8 and 8:30 time slots to air DBZ Kai and One Piece reruns. As Kai's original Toonami broadcast drew to a close, people were wondering what exactly would be next. Toei and Funimation began to double dip for 2017, and Toonami would be airing both Super and Kai the Final Chapters at the same time. What happened to Kai the Final Chapters is odd in of itself. I remember it aired in Japan around 2014. And I also remember one of my friends showing me a pirated clip on his phone showing the Japanese opening Kyuzen Zetsu Go, which I was just surprised about because I didn't even know they were making more Kai to begin with. I wasn't super into researching random anime facts at this time. Doing research for this video led me to believe that some voice actors like Sean Schemmel and Kyle Hebert had completed their lines back in April 2013, but official updates for this time were near non-existent. Once 2017 finally rolled around, a new promo also aired to update people regarding the current Toonami schedule. However, there was something peculiar regarding the Kai footage used in this promo. To give a quick recap, the Z Fighters end up watching a stage reenactment of the Cell Saga that blatantly puts Mr. Satan in the highlight. The version that originally aired on Toonami simply had the dialogue from the original DBZ dub, but the version on demand instead had various members of Team 4-Star cameo in the Cell Games reenactment. I wasn't super connected to Dragon Ball Z Abridged back then, but I absolutely knew of them and their impact, and I'm not surprised that Toei doesn't exactly have a great relationship with them. They likely saw the initial promo and demanded the episode be pulled, but it was too late for video on demand services to get the memo. The clip is still online and makes its rounds on social media every couple months, but home media releases do not have this clip intact for obvious reasons. Kai the Final Chapters was also unique because it actually had a unique opening and ending for international audiences, and said songs are just okay. The opening, Fight It Out, and the ending, Never Give Up, are just whatever songs in my opinion. The soundtrack is also now composed by Norihito Sumimoto, whose scores I personally find pretty forgettable in this, but he did better in Super. I think because of all these weird quirks, I didn't watch this nearly as much as the original Kai. Not to say that I think it's an objectively bad product, but as someone who watched the original Kai on TV, I do feel like there was a bit of Dragon Ball oversaturation, and if this Buu saga were initially done during Kai's original run, I probably would have just stayed glued to that. I did watch a little bit more Super, but I didn't watch either shows to completion, and I would like to do so someday. Maybe it was a part of me getting older. When Kai the Final Chapters finally wrapped up, it was around like late June 2018. I was in the middle of my college run, likely doing an internship on top of my studies. I was looking towards the future, and the future was admittedly pretty hazy. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do post-college, but I thought my life was in a good spot. I found a niche of good friends I could see on a regular basis, and I was about to give YouTube a spin. But surely nothing bad would happen, right? When we last left off, I alluded to how my life and the world around me changed after Kai the Final Chapters ended. It wouldn't be fair to just skip over a lot of details though, so allow me to cover what I missed, so you can better gain an understanding about my own perspective about Dragon Ball. It's important to know that after 2009, Dragon Ball Z had a refresh in not only its voice actors, but the way it was marketed as well. Starting in 2009, Funimation would begin implementing this new refreshed Kai cast into Dragon Ball media. The dubbing of Dragon Ball Curse of the Blood Rubies was peculiar as a result, as it was a Dragon Ball movie dubbed long after the production of the original Funimation English dub. As a result, it had cast Colleen Clinkenbeard as Goku and Monica Rial as Bulma, replacing Stephanie Nadolny and Tiffany Vollmer respectively. I feel like I'm part of a minority that prefers Colleen as young Gohan, but prefers Stephanie as Goku, if that makes any sense. On the one hand, it just kinda takes me out of it hearing Colleen's Goku whenever they do flashbacks in Kai. But on the other hand, especially considering that it had been a very long time since I saw Dragon Ball Z, especially any episodes that had Stephanie's performance as Kid Gohan, it was just very easy for me to see Colleen's performance as the default. And even still, I would never say that Colleen's performance as Goku is quote unquote bad. It's just different. It's weird that many people older than me take issue with their childhoods being ignored because of this new cast refresh. And I can kind of understand. Toei has all but confirmed that Kai is the definitive way for people to watch Dragon Ball Z. I understand the frustration of having history be rewritten in front of your very eyes, especially if it's your childhood. Still, at the very least, there are ways of watching the original version of Dragon Ball Z. You can still buy a home release as a close enough approximation to what you personally prefer. Dragon Ball Z made its quote-unquote comeback to theaters with the movie Battle of Gods. It's a bit weird talking about both this and the movie sequel Resurrection F because they're branded as DBZ movies, but were later adapted into Dragon Ball Super anime. Toonami often played movies in the 2010s, and people were confused as to why neither of them got broadcast. Toei did value the broadcast of Kai Toonami enough to use it to promote the theatrical release of Resurrection F, with a preview clip being shown on August 1st, 2015. It wasn't until April 1st, 2020 that Dragon Ball Z returned for one night, a marathon that aired episodes 78 to 84 of the Cell Saga. If you were to just consume it on surface level, Dragon Ball Z in any form is a perfect popcorn show that's there when you need it. And when we were neck deep into the pandemic, that we are still in, by the way, any sort of comfort that we could get was greatly appreciated. We wouldn't see Kai return to the block until this past February, and I was surprised because it ended up taking a slot that was previously given to IGPX, and it's been 10 months since then, and I think I might be finally sick of Dragon Ball Z Kai. To the viewer, this is a huge surprise. It's just complicated to explain, I think. It's not just the frequent re-airings of Kai, but I don't think it helps either. I had originally postponed the release of this video because of Toonami Rewind, a nostalgia bait block that was supposed to throw back to the glory days of Toonami when it aired on weekdays right after school and people were there to watch it. In the process of just thinking about the past, writing that block entry and thinking about how I would conclude this video, it made me realize that looking to the past too much is tiring. Many others will continue to look to the past for comfort and nostalgia. Hell, we have entire industries of it. It's just the idea of trying to chase the high of watching TV when you were 12. And maybe it's because I'm not a #90s kid, but I don't want to define my life just by that. I'll never be 12 again. As I get older, I have to grapple with the weight of death and never being able to talk to people that I care about. Up to this point, it never dawned on me how meaningful death is. I was a naive, lucky child that didn't really have to worry about these concepts. The people who I cared about were still here, and on the odd occasion I had to attend a funeral, it was for someone that I didn't remember, or didn't really talk to at all. Maybe we didn't even meet. I obviously still felt bad, but there was more guilt about not feeling as devastated as everyone around me. A lot of that guilt still hangs over my neck to this day. It might be ironic to talk about death in the same breath as a series like Dragon Ball, where it seems like death has very little stakes, but I think we end up letting what the series has turned into cloud our judgment a little bit. The History of Trunks was a Z special that I first saw during Kai's broadcast on Nicktoons, so it was in the 2010s. That special stuck with me because it showed how death can completely change a person's demeanor. In the world of future Trunks, everyone we've been following up to this point died at the hands of the androids, and whoever was left is trying to cling on to whatever hope they have. We all know that Future Gohan died, giving Future Trunks huge amounts of sorrow that let him transform to a Super Saiyan. Sure, we focus on that the most, but Future Gohan was his own character, and he was grieving the death of his father and all of his loved ones just the same.
What am I doing wrong? You're my master, Gohan. You can tell me. Why can't I do it?
You can. Sure, Trunks. You just need to find the right motivation, that's all. Yeah, for me it's simple. All I have to do is think of how the androids killed Piccolo and Krillin. Then I feel a horrible hurt, and then the pain from that turns into rage. It's maddening. I don't ever want it to happen again. Something that unfair. And then suddenly, the dam breaks.
Sure, he's the splitting image of Goku and has assumed the mentor role that Piccolo was to him, but is it a role that he's happy about? What's he really meant to go down this path? If there's anything I gained from watching that special, it's that when we do lose loved ones, it fundamentally changes us, and we're never the same. It's why reflecting on the trauma Gohan faced in the Cell Saga shakes me to my core. Let's just say that growing up as a black kid means you're going to go through emotionally traumatic events that are completely out of your control, and compounded with the insistence that boys don't cry, culminates in a profound loss of innocence that strikes us much sooner than anyone else has to. In a perfect world, nobody should feel like that, but most people do. It wasn't a heroic moment when he turned Super Saiyan 2. It wasn't anything to cheer. It was the death of his childhood. As I grow up, I've seen people like me just having to toughen up, having to be transformed by the need to perform masculinity, to be what the world expects of them rather than what they want to be. I think through that lens, the character of Gohan growing up continues to mystify me. It's a character that I just want to have peace. When my grandma finally passed, it felt like the world stopped. And you can imagine that the entire world stopped when Akira Toriyama passed. For all intents and purposes, this video, if I were to make it in like 2019, then it would have ended at part 1. But because of everything that's happened to me and the world around me, the direction of this project changed immediately afterwards. It's already been a year since my grandmother passed. Life is very different now. It'll never be the same. It's a lot quieter. The holidays aren't really jolly anymore. But it doesn't mean that me and my mom will ever forget my grandma. Akira Toriyama's works continue to influence and inspire countless people across the globe. I understand I'm not exactly the most knowledgeable person about his work. I can't name the people who boarded specific shots in Dragon Ball Z. I haven't played Chrono Trigger or Dragon Quest, and I haven't had much familiarity of works like Dr. Slump or Sandland. But that doesn't mean that I or anyone else in my shoes respect him or his work any less. Whether we're aware of it or not, everything that Akira Toriyama has made impacted numerous other creatives that inspire the lives of others, even in places where we may not expect. I hate to sound like a shonen protagonist, but I feel like it is my responsibility to uphold my grandmother's moral values. She was a woman who genuinely had a pure heart and gave everything to make her family happy. I literally would not be alive if not for her. As for Dragon Ball Z Kai itself, I've had my fill of it for now, but it's defined my entire life for at least a decade and a half. I think that's more than enough time to give that show its dues. This specific iteration of Dragon Ball Z is what I have the most emotional attachment towards. I'm very glad I'm able to grow up with it, and I'll always cherish the memories I've had with it. I also hope that talking about it through my perspective can give a voice to people my age who also grew up with Kai. And I hope with this franchise that kids will be able to make their own memories instead of having to live in the shadow of mine. Memories should be cherished. And as long as the people who mean so much to us are never forgotten, they are never truly gone.